Hey guys, it's Tekosaur, and I'm more than pleased to be making this video because I know you guys have been waiting eagerly for it. I'm sorry for the delay, but I needed the right time and preparations to ensure giving you the best result. I won't get into a lot of intro because you probably already know the topic we have today. But in case you don't, let me tell you briefly. It has become a tradition on Tekosaur to tighten the memory timings of different PC gaming handhelds. So far, this process has been done successfully on both the ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion Go, and it has proven to improve performance in some instances by quite well. So if you are looking to maximize your Ally X performance to higher levels, tune in as I'll show you in this video everything about it, from getting started to fully understand how to tighten your Ally X memory timings while making sure it stays in shape with a stable system. And finally, we'll do various benchmarks and gaming performance tests. With that being said, let's get right in. Now, in case you are wondering what memory timings are anyway and why are we doing it, I'll explain in plain words. Memory timings refer to the delay measured in clock cycles for specific tasks like reading, writing, or copying data, and there are various types and each timing value represents how long these operations take. Since they are measured in clock cycles, faster memory has shorter delays, and these timings can be converted to nanoseconds to show the real-time delay involved. Their values we see here are in decimals. I want you to remember that because later on, as we tighten them, we'll have to do some conversions. Alright, with that being cleared, let's get down to business. You can see here how our memory timings will start having these values and get further tightened to these. The first thing I recommend is that you install Zen timing software. It's totally free and gives you the current memory timings. I want you to make sure that your memory model matches the one I have, which is by Micron. Because if yours is different, most of the timings I'm about to set on my unit may not work for you. So if yours in Zen timings matches the one I have by Micron, then I guess it's safe to say they'll pretty much work. But still, there's a small chance they may not, at least partially. In order to tighten the memory timings, we'll use the one and only SMOKELESS tool. It's also free and can be installed directly onto a USB drive and just load it as an advanced BIOS menu while still keeping your other Ally X BIOS settings intact. It just unlocks the modifications of some additional AMD settings that the Ally X original BIOS dashboard doesn't have. So once we have the SMOKELESS tool on the USB drive, note that it should be formatted to FAT32. I've connected my Ally X to a docking station with the following things connected. Power delivery. I recommend that you connect it to power as you do this process. I also have the USB drive with the SMOKELESS tool in it and a keyboard connected because in a SMOKELESS tool, you can navigate using the Ally X controller. So pressing the volume up button as the Ally X is booting, we can go to the BIOS menu. Press Y button on the Ally to get to advanced mode, then hit to the boot tab. Change the boot option from Windows to the USB drive that has the tool in it. And make sure to keep the second boot option to Windows Boot Manager. We are going to need that for debugging purposes. Finally, disable secure boot, save changes, and exit. Now it should boot us directly to the tool. From here on, go to Device Manager, AMD CBS, UMC Common Option, LPDDR Options, and here we find all the memory related settings. What interests us, however, in here is the timing configuration. Once we are in, we'll change the active memory timing setting from auto to enable. And here I'll set the maximum memory data clock speed to the Ally X maximum one, which is 7500 MTS. Here we have the SPD and the non-SPD timings. The SPD, which is a shortcut of serial presence detect, modified specially for cache latency, which are critical because they determine how quickly the memory responds to data requests, and setting them incorrectly can make the system quite unstable, as they are finely tuned for the memory performance. Even a small mistake can lead to crashes or boot failure. Now that's why we have to carefully tune them. And I want to note that values set here in BIOS are in hexadecimal. So they are not the decimals we saw earlier on Zen timings. This is why in order to do this, we can use any online tool to convert between them. For example, F in hexadecimal will be 15 in decimals. So what we set in the SMOKELESS tool as F will show up 15 in Zen timings. Or you can convert from decimal to hexadecimals to understand what the default timings are in hexadecimal as a starting point. That's what I usually do for those tunings. I convert what I already have as baseline and tighten them gradually. Anyway, along with SPD timings, we'll also tighten the non-SPD ones, which goes way longer, but if you ask me, is it worth it to tune them as well? I'll tell you yes, as later on in benchmarks, it will prove to be a performance gaming changer with them tightened. Alright, now I'll go through all the memory timings I've set so you can see them. You can also find them written in the pinned comment of this video. Now that we are done, we can go all the way back. Here it prompts us to save changes. Press Y on the keyboard for confirmation. And finally, press continue. We'll give it some time to apply them, about 40 seconds. Don't press the volume up button to go to the Ally X BIOS dashboard yet, because first, we'll need to make sure it's stable. Usually, even if it was unstable, it would reboot to the tool just like this. Now here is a technique I found to know whether it's initially stable enough to not soft break itself. If I go to the tool without changing anything and just press continue, it will take us to the second boot option we have selected, which is a Windows 1 if you remember. Of course, since we have secure boot off, it won't let us in, and that's actually good. Now what I do is just pressing the power button once and it completely shuts itself down. Now I turn it back on, and if it vibrates and the white ROG logo lasts for a second or two and it boots normally again, that indicates that with the new memory timings it's stable enough to boot to Windows, and it wouldn't break itself at least. Again, I didn't press the volume up button because I want to show you what would happen if it was unstable to boot. If for example I change this single timing to a wrong value, which I already know wouldn't be stable, but just to show you. Now I'll save the changes and reset. You can see so far it's behaving the same. I want to press the volume up button and let it boot to Smokeless tool. Now if I press continue without changing anything again, it takes us to the Windows Boot Manager just like before. So far it's been the same, but watch what happens when I turn it off and then try to turn it back on. First it didn't vibrate and it shows the white ROG logo and lasts like this forever. Even doesn't light up the joystick RGB. So when I have this situation, in order to break from being stuck, I'll press and hold the power button for a few seconds, and you will see it will now light up and vibrate. Sometimes it may turn off completely, and if we press the power button again, it behaves pretty much the same like now, like it will do a BIOS recovery process, and it will boot us back to the Smokeless tool automatically since we didn't change the boot option yet. Then we can change back the wrong value to the correct one, and as you can see, it works again just fine. However, despite how this trick may minimize greatly the difficulties we may face, Due to the wrong memory timings values, sometimes BIOS may not be able to recover itself back and get stuck in this loop. So the definite way to solve this is to hard reset the memory timings back to default. To do that, turn off the Ally X and unscrew the back plate. Be careful though not to remove the back cover with force, as there is a ribbon cable connected from mainboard to the back for the back buttons. You don't need to disconnect it, it's long enough so you can just lay it down like this. You will still need a pry tool to make it easy to remove the battery cable. And to remove the battery cable from mainboard, use the sharp part of the pry tool to remove the locking mechanism it has. There are two metal pieces locking the cable. Just disconnect them gently and lift the cable from top. There are two plastic parts that hold it, so just remove it and it's disconnected this way. Then press the power button for a few seconds to drain all the power from mainboard. This will then remove all power from the BIOS chip, which holds all the set memory timings, so this action would ultimately reset it back to the factory ones. Wait for about 40 seconds. To reconnect the cable, just align the plastic parts on the two holes found on the cable sides. Use the pry tool again to reconnect the metal lugs to it. Apply some pressure with the pry tool as you do this so they can connect. Then put the cover back on. Now since we removed the back cover, it wouldn't turn back on unless we plug it to the power for the first time. Now if I turn it back on, it would have reverted the memory timings back to default and returning memory back again. Give it about a minute. And as you can see, we are back to safety. So this is what you can call a hard reset of memory timings to factory. And honestly, in order to set this whole tweak, I had to resort to this method about 10 times. And the first technique I told you about saved me from much more than 50 times from doing that. Keep in mind that whenever you update the BIOS or reflash it, you will have to set the memory timings back again. Or also, if you would like to reset them back to the default, you can do so in the Ally dashboard by pressing the reset settings back to default. This would also reset the memory timings along with other options you have set in the Ally X BIOS dashboard. Now that I've set the tightened memory timings we had working, I'll select the boot back into Windows and enable secure boot again. And you can see we are back to Windows and all is good. Now here is a comparison between the default timings, the ones with only tightened SPD and the one including both tightened SPD and non-SPD. These are the tightest I could go with while keeping a super stable Ally X. And speaking of stability, to actually verify it, you can use AIDA64 Extreme software, which is trial free for 30 days. Do its stability test and make sure it strays all of CPU, FPU, cache, and system memory. Leave the local disk and GPU unchecked. You should aim to run it for at least an hour and a half. For me, to ensure further stability, I ran it for an hour and a half, then another 2 hours and about 20 minutes, so in total about 4 hours. There is another software called RAM Test, which is specialized in spotting memory errors and test stability. And it's actually pretty fast at doing that. However, it's paid only. If you don't feel it's worth it, you can stick with the AIDA64, but for me, for the purpose of making this video, I had to test it on RAM Test app as well for 2 hours and then 4 hours and 15 minutes overnight. So in total, over 6 hours. So combined with AIDA64, I tested stability for roughly 10 hours and I think it's pretty enough. Now that we've ensured stability, still in AIDA64 software, I'll show you the difference in memory benchmark. For read speed, default is 57,949, tightened SPD 58,517, and tightened SPD and non-SPD 58,769. For write speed, we gained about 5,000 MB, while in copy, a whopping 6,000 MB. Finally, for latency, we see almost no change, but we can also see at least we actually got a pretty huge difference from when we had only the tightened SPD timings versus when we add the tightened non-SPD on top of it. So it was worth doing the non-SPD too after all. I also went ahead and did the still Nomad light test on 3D Mark in 20 watt and 30 watt. For 20 watts, our scores are default 2255, tightened SPD 2384, and finally tightened SPD and non-SPD 2411. So around a 150-point increase. That's another astonishing improvement in synthetic benchmarks. Now for 30 watt setup, default 2758, tightened SPD 2793, and tightened SPD and non-SPD 2821. So we see here another less increase, around 75 from default to final tightened timings, but still any improvement could make some change. So far, we've seen quite an improvement across the board, but you guys are probably wondering how things are in actual gaming. So I've prepared gaming benchmarks for 7 games running in 900p native resolution at low settings in both 20 watt and 30 watt. Starting with Cyberpunk 2077, we see that FPS increase is rather quite minimal. There's really nothing notable in terms of performance improvement. The way I see, there is around 1 to 2 FPS difference. But in Black Myth Wukong, it's a total different story. We got around a 9 FPS increase on average on both 20 watt and 30 watt. Also, our low FPS has reached higher boundaries. From default to tightened SPD, there isn't much difference, but only when we did the non-SPD ones, it made a huge impact on this game. It's quite surprising. I mean, the uplift is quite notable, unlike what we have seen in Cyberpunk 2077. And also in Borderlands 3, we see a great improvement. Like when it's hovering around 80 FPS on default, it's 100 FPS on the tightened timing. That's not bad at all. In this one, by changing SPD timing, it made half the performance uplift, and adding the non-SPD ones made it superb. Switching to our fourth game, Horizon Zero Dawn, we are back to having almost no FPS change. Our FPS is around the same in all setups with nothing really to mention. It didn't worsen, but it didn't improve much either. And it's the same case in Forza Motorsport 2. All setups are consistently about the same. You may see improved 0.1% loss, but it's nothing significant. The same is true in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, where we see a very little microscopic change. The reason I'm showing you this, so you don't expect that it may change performance for all games. This depends on other factors besides memory timings like GPU, CPU, or even the game engine itself. There are many other things to take account for. Our final game, Red Dead Redemption 2, we see a consistent 2 FPS improvement throughout some scenes in the game built-in benchmark at times. But in actual gameplay, it's not that different. So guys, the main takeaway is that the tightened memory timings can improve your Ally X performance, but reasonably. In some scenarios, memory timings may not play a role, but we saw how in synthetic benchmarks that it gave us a good improvement. And also in some games like Wukong and Borderlands 3, it improved quite a lot, like at times it felt like a 10% performance increase. Still, I am personally satisfied with it, especially that it's safe, free, and can be used over long term. Finally, it's worth noting that I did all benchmarks while using BIOS version 304, and right after I finished recording all benchmarks, Asus released BIOS version 308. I then went ahead and updated and can confirm that memory timings are working on this BIOS version as well. I'll do my best to test the tightened memory timings whenever we get a BIOS update on the Ally X and try to benchmark them so you can see if there is any difference over time. I also have a surprise comparison for you all, but I won't spoil it now. Additionally, I may also try tightening memory timings while running memory on a lower speed like 7000 MTS, because this will allow us to tighten them more than when we have speed on 7500 MTS. And who knows, it may push performance even further than the tightened 7500 MTS we have here. So finally guys, I truly hope you found this video useful, and if you did, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel in case you haven't. Your support will allow Techosaur to really expand beyond this, and I promise you that we'll always aim to do amazing stuff. Your support is truly priceless, and it's the driving force to achieve all of the channel accomplishments. I thank you for watching, and as always, if you have any questions or are facing any issues setting it up, don't hesitate to leave a comment below, or you can also connect with me on the Techosaur Discord server. And finally, if you've managed to have it working with this tightened memory timings, please leave down a comment of your experience and what games you tested and what kind of games you got with it. This will help all of us understand the true potential of it. What I benchmarked today is probably just the surface of what may be discovered. Thanks for watching and see you guys in the next one. Peace out.